The night was cold and the streets were almost empty. The alien girl walked slowly, her body weak, her steps heavy. Her clothes were torn, her eyes hollow, and her stomach kept twisting with pain. She had not eaten for days, and her legs shook with every step. People passed her on the street, but no one stopped to help. Some stared with disgust, some muttered rude words under their breath, and others simply looked away as if she was invisible. She pulled her arms around herself, trying to hide her trembling, but the hunger was stronger than her shame. The smell of food hit her nose, and she froze. It came from a small restaurant at the corner of the street. The warm light from inside spilled onto the wet ground, and she could see humans sitting at tables, laughing, eating, enjoying steaming dishes that made her mouth water. She pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. Her throat ached as she swallowed, but there was nothing in her stomach. For a moment, she thought about knocking on the door, but fear stopped her. Humans were dangerous. She had learned that too many times already. Her vision blurred and her knees buckled. She sank down on the cold stone right in front of the restaurant. The world spun and she pressed a hand to her stomach. Her head dropped, and she thought this was how her life would end, alone, weak, unwanted, on the steps of a place that smelled of food she could never touch. From inside, a man noticed her. He was a chef, cleaning his counter as the night grew quieter. His eyes shifted to the window, and he saw her collapsed figure. For a moment, he hesitated. He had seen aliens before, some begging, some stealing, and many humans pushed them away. But there was something about the way this girl sat, her thin body curled like she had no strength left. He wiped his hands on his apron, set his tools down, and walked toward the door. The girl heard footsteps. Her heart jumped, and panic spread through her veins. She forced her head up, her glowing alien eyes catching the figure of a tall man in a white chef's coat. He stepped out into the cold, his breath visible in the night air. She tried to push herself up, ready to run, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed again. Her chest rose and fell quickly, like a trapped animal. The chef stopped a few feet away. He did not shout at her, did not wave his arms or curse her like others had done. Instead, he crouched down slowly, so his face was closer to hers, his voice calm but firm. "You look like you're dying out here," he said. She shook her head, clutching her stomach tighter, her lips trembling. The words of humans were not safe. Many times, she had trusted kind voices only to be punished later. He placed a hand on the ground to steady himself, lowering his tone even more. "Come inside. You don't have to stay out here." The offer sounded simple, but to her, it was strange and terrifying. Why would a human invite her inside? Was it a trick? Would he lock her up, sell her, or worse? She stared at him, her eyes narrow, suspicion mixing with hunger. The chef stood again and opened the door wide, letting the smell of food drift out even stronger. The warm light lit the path between her and the restaurant. For a long second, she only sat there, her heart pounding, torn between running away and stepping forward. She glanced around the street, empty, cold, and dark. Then her gaze returned to the man waiting at the door. He wasn't smiling, wasn't forcing her, just standing there, patient. Her legs moved slowly, almost against her will. She pulled herself up, swaying, nearly falling again. The chef stepped forward, ready to catch her, but she raised a hand, warning him not to touch. His brows furrowed, but he respected her space. Inch by inch, she shuffled forward until she reached the door. The warmth hit her first, wrapping around her frozen body. Inside, the room went quiet. Customers turned their heads, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Whispers began to rise. "Why is she here?" one man muttered. "Aliens don't belong," another woman hissed. The alien girl felt their stares like knives in her back. She wanted to turn around and escape, but the smell of food was too strong, and the chef's presence blocked the way out. He gestured toward an empty chair near the corner. "Sit." His voice left no room for argument, but it wasn't cruel. Shaking, she slid into the chair, her hands gripping the table as if she might be thrown out at any moment. Her eyes darted around, watching every human face, every movement, ready to flee if danger came. The chef disappeared into the kitchen, and she thought maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe this was all a mistake. But then he returned, carrying a bowl of hot soup. He set it down gently in front of her. The steam rose, the smell filling her senses, making her dizzy with hunger. She stared at the bowl, then at him, not touching it. Eat, he said simply. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. The first taste burned her tongue, but it was the most wonderful pain she had ever felt. She ate quickly, almost desperately, afraid someone might take it away. All the while, the chef stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her with a face she couldn't read. Not pity, not disgust, something else, something she couldn't understand. For the first time in a long time, warmth spread through her chest. Not just from the soup, but from the strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, this night was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something else. The spoon shook in her hand as she lifted it again, her eyes moving quickly around the room. Every human in the restaurant seemed to be watching her. Their whispers crawled into her ears like sharp blades. Some muttered that she didn't belong here. Others laughed quietly, and a few looked at her with open hatred. She swallowed hard, the warm soup sliding into her empty stomach, but the fear in her chest stayed heavy. Each sound of laughter, each clink of a glass, felt like it was meant to remind her that she was different, unwanted. Still, she could not stop eating. The soup was simple, but for her it was the richest thing she had ever tasted. Every spoonful filled her hollow body with life again, yet every bite made her more nervous. What if this was the last one? What if the chef changed his mind and told her to leave? She kept her head low, chewing quickly, as if speed alone could protect her. The chef stood not far away, his arms crossed over his chest, watching her quietly. Unlike the others, he did not speak, did not laugh, and did not look at her with disgust. His eyes followed her shaking hands and her desperate movements, and he seemed more curious than angry. When she finally slowed down, setting the spoon back in the bowl, he walked closer and sat across from her. "You ate like you haven't touched food in days," he said in a calm, steady voice. She froze, her eyes narrowing at him. She did not answer. Words were dangerous. She had learned silence was safer when humans asked questions. If she stayed quiet, maybe he would lose interest. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "What's your name?" he asked. Her chest tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her name. That one thing could be enough to expose her, to tie her back to the people who hunted her, to the world she had escaped from. A name meant chains, pain, and memories she didn't want to remember. She lowered her head and shook it once. The chef did not press further. He let out a slow breath and leaned back. "Fine," he said. "No name then. But you can't just sit outside on the ground like that. You'll die." His words were simple, but to her they sounded strange, almost worried. No one had spoken to her like that before. She gripped the edge of the table harder, her sharp nails pressing into the wood. She wanted to believe him, but every part of her screamed that trust was a trap. One of the customers, a man with a red face from drinking too much, raised his voice. "Hey, why is she here? You're really going to feed one of them?" His words were dripping with disgust, and the room stirred with agreement. "Next thing you know, she'll steal from us." The alien girl's body tensed. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the shadows where no one could touch her. Her hands shook, and she thought about running out the door. But the chef turned his head, his voice sharp like a blade. "She's eating, that's all. If you don't like it, you can leave." The man grumbled, but went back to his drink. The rest of the room grew quieter, though the whispers did not fully stop. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. No one had ever defended her before, not even with a single word. The chef looked back at her. "Ignore them," he said. His tone was steady, as if it was the simplest advice in the world. But for her, it was impossible. She had lived her whole life under eyes that judged, mocked, or hated her. Yet the way he said it made her pause. Her stomach was full now, but her heart was restless. She pushed the bowl slightly away, afraid of taking too much. She whispered softly, barely a breath. "Why?" The chef leaned closer, frowning. "Why what?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry even after the soup. Her glowing eyes flickered to his face, then down again. "Why? Food? For me?" The words sounded broken, clumsy, as if she had forgotten how to form them. For the first time, he gave her a small smile, tired but genuine. "Because you looked hungry," he said simply. "Hungry people should eat. Doesn't matter who they are." She blinked, stunned by the plainness of the answer. No hidden threat, no demand in return. Just food, just kindness. Something so small, yet for her it felt impossible to understand. She wanted to believe, but her heart whispered that it could not last. Kindness always turned into cruelty sooner or later. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the table, her claws scratching lines into the wood. She looked toward the door again, half expecting someone to drag her out. But no one came. The chef stayed there, his gaze steady, his body calm. He didn't treat her like a monster or a thief, only like someone who needed to eat. For the first time in years, she felt her body relax slightly. Just a little. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing slowed. She leaned back in the chair, though her eyes still darted toward every sudden movement in the room. She was still afraid, still ready to run, but some small part of her allowed the warmth of the food to sink deeper. The chef stood, picking up her empty bowl. "You can stay here until you feel stronger," he said. "That no one will throw you out." His voice carried across the room, sharp enough that no one dared to argue. She looked up at him, confused. Stay? Inside? With humans? That was dangerous. But outside was colder, darker, lonelier. Her mind twisted between fear and need. She wanted to run, but her weak body told her she couldn't survive another night alone. She pulled her legs up on the chair and hugged them close, her glowing eyes fixed on him as he walked back into the kitchen. Around her, humans returned to their meals, though a few still glanced her way. The girl sat quietly, her heart racing, trying to understand. She had come here expecting to die on the street. Instead, she had been fed. Instead, she had been allowed to sit at a table. Instead, for one fragile moment, she felt almost human. She did not know if it was real or if it would vanish in an instant, but deep inside, something told her that this strange human chef had just changed the path of her life. The restaurant grew quieter as the night stretched on. Most of the customers had left, leaving only a few who lingered over drinks. The alien girl sat in the corner, her body curled into itself, as if she was ready to vanish at any second. She had eaten, but her eyes still carried fear, and her hands kept tightening around her knees. She did not belong here, and she knew it. Sooner or later, she would be pushed out like always. The chef walked back from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. His eyes studied her carefully. He could see the way she flinched at every sound, the way her head snapped up whenever someone moved too quickly. She was ready to run, but too weak to survive on her own. He pulled a chair and sat across from her again. "You can't keep living on scraps," he said firmly. "If you do, you'll be dead before the next week." She stiffened, her glowing eyes flicking to his face. His tone wasn't cruel, but the words cut deep because she knew they were true. She had been living from one stolen piece of bread to another, always hiding, always running. And every day she had been closer to collapsing for good. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If you're hungry, don't beg. Work with me." The words struck her like thunder. She blinked fast, unsure if she had heard correctly. Work? With him? No one had ever offered her such a thing. To humans, she was only a burden, a thief. Or worse, a creature that didn't deserve dignity. Her claws dug into the fabric of her torn clothes. Was this another trick? Was he trying to make her lower her guard? She shook her head slowly. No safe. Her voice was low, broken, almost a whisper. The chef tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Safe? Listen, I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job. You work, you eat. That's fair, isn't it? She swallowed hard, confusion swirling in her chest. Fair. That word had never existed in her world. Everything had always been taken from her, never given in balance. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He stood up and gestured for her to follow. Suspicion froze her in place. Her muscles tensed, and she thought about running to the door. But then the smell of food still clung to the air, and her empty heart kept her glued to the chair. Slowly, she stood, her legs trembling, and trailed behind him toward the kitchen. The door swung open, and warmth hit her again. The kitchen was alive with heat, the sizzle of pans, and the rich smell of cooked meals. She froze at the doorway, her eyes wide. She had never been allowed in a place like this before. The counters gleamed, knives were neatly lined up, and pots simmered on the stove. It felt like another world compared to the cold streets she had known. The chef picked up a clean apron and held it out to her. "Here," he said. Her hands shook as she reached for it. The fabric felt strange in her grip, heavy with meaning. She looked at him in disbelief. "Why? Give me?" "Because if you're going to work here, you need to look like it," he replied simply. "Work here." The words echoed in her mind. She pulled the apron over her thin body, the strings dangling loosely around her waist. It didn't fit well, but the act of wearing it made her feel different. Not a beggar, not a thief, but something else. Maybe even someone who belonged. The chef guided her toward a counter and placed a knife in front of her. She flinched, staring at it with suspicion. He noticed and spoke calmly. "It's for cutting vegetables, nothing else." He placed a carrot on the board and sliced it cleanly. "Like this," he said. Then he stepped back and nodded toward her. "Your turn." Her claws tapped nervously against the handle of the knife. She lowered it clumsily and tried to copy his motion. The knife slipped, almost cutting her finger, and she gasped, jerking her hand away. Panic rose in her chest. She expected him to yell, to call her useless, to throw her out like others had done when she failed. But he didn't. Instead, he calmly picked up another carrot and repeated the motion. "Again," he said. Her chest tightened, confused by his patience. Shaking, she tried again. The cut was crooked, ugly, but it worked. She stared at the piece of carrot, her lips parting slightly. She had done it. Not well, but enough. She looked up at him, searching for anger, but found none. "That's better," he said, nodding. Her heart raced. This was real. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't lying. He was teaching her. For the first time in her life, someone was giving her a chance to do something more than just survive. But deep inside, fear still lingered. Why? Why would he do this? What did he want in return? She didn't trust it yet. She couldn't. He walked past her, checking on the pots, and spoke without looking at her. "This place could be your home if you want." Her hand froze around the knife. Home. That word burned in her chest. She hadn't had a home since she could remember. Home had always been taken from her, burned, destroyed, or denied. She trembled, her body torn between hope and terror. If she believed him, and it turned out to be false, the pain would destroy her. But if it was true, then maybe her life could finally change. She looked down at the crooked pieces of carrot on the board, then at the apron tied loosely around her thin frame. A tiny spark lit inside her, fragile but alive. She didn't answer him, but she didn't walk away either. And for the chef, that was enough. The morning light spilled into the restaurant, and the girl stood nervously near the counter, still wearing the apron the chef had given her. Her hands fidgeted at her sides, her eyes darting from one corner of the room to another. She was not used to being inside a place for so long. Every sound made her tense. Every movement made her think someone might grab her. The chef, already busy preparing for the day, glanced at her and spoke in his calm, firm tone. "You said you wanted to try. Then today, you learn." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. She hadn't said the words exactly, but staying had meant she agreed. She wanted food, she wanted a place, and now she had to prove she deserved it. The thought alone made her stomach twist with fear. The chef started with simple things. He showed her how to wipe down the tables, how to clean the chairs, and how to sweep the floor. The broom felt strange in her hands. She moved awkwardly, sweeping too hard in one spot and not enough in another. Dust flew everywhere, and she coughed, her ears flattening in embarrassment. Customers had just started coming in, and some chuckled at the sight of her clumsy movements. "Look at her," one man muttered loudly. "Can't even hold a broom properly." Her hands tightened on the wooden handle, shame burning through her chest. She wanted to throw the broom down and run, but then she saw the chef watching her from behind the counter. He didn't laugh. He didn't scold. He only gave a small nod as if to say, "Keep going." That silent signal pushed her forward. She lowered her head and continued sweeping, even though her hands ached and her pride hurt more. Later, the chef guided her into the kitchen again. He placed vegetables in front of her, the same way he had done the night before. "Cut them," he said. His tone was not harsh, but it carried weight. She picked up the knife, her fingers trembling. She pressed down on a tomato, and juice spilled across the board, soaking her hands. The cut was uneven, messy. She hissed under her breath, ready for him to shout. Instead, he only said, "Do it again." So she did. And again, and again. By the time she managed a half-decent slice, her arms were shaking from the effort, and her eyes stung with frustration. She wanted to scream, to tell him she couldn't. But every time she looked up, his steady gaze met hers, and something inside her refused to quit. Hours passed, and she was exhausted. Her apron was wet with spilled soup, her fingers nicked from small cuts, her hair messy from moving too quickly. Still, the chef kept her working. He showed her how to carry dishes, how to set them down without spilling, how to wash them until they shone. Her alien hands were not used to the tools, and she dropped plates more than once. Each time, the sound of shattering glass filled the air, and the whole restaurant turned to look. Whispers rose again. She'll ruin the place. Why keep her here? Throw her out before she breaks everything. Her chest tightened so much she thought she would stop breathing. She crouched down to pick up the shards, her fingers trembling. The shame was unbearable. Her eyes burned, and tears threatened to fall. She muttered in a broken whisper, "I can't." The chef knelt down beside her, picking up the larger pieces. "Yes, you can," he said firmly. His voice left no space for doubt. She looked at him, confused. He wasn't angry. She had broken his dishes, wasted his time, embarrassed him in front of his customers. Yet he stayed calm, his expression steady, as if he believed something she could not yet see in herself. That night, when the last customer left, the girl collapsed on one of the chairs. Her whole body hurt, her arms sore, her feet aching from standing all day. Her mind was heavy with shame for every mistake, but underneath, a strange new feeling flickered. She had survived the day. She had worked, even if poorly, and she was still here. The chef placed a small plate of food in front of her, the same meal he had served paying customers. She stared at it in shock. "For me?" she asked softly. He nodded. "You worked. You earned it." Her throat closed up, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She picked up the fork slowly and took a bite. It wasn't just food. It was proof that she had done something, given something, instead of only taking. For the first time, she felt a spark of pride mix with the warmth of the meal. But she knew the danger wasn't gone. She had seen the looks from the customers, the whispers, the anger in their eyes. They didn't want her here. One wrong move, and she would be dragged back to the streets. Fear still clung to her like a shadow. But now there was something else too, determination. When the chef walked past, she looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "I learn," she whispered. He paused, then gave a small nod. "Good. Tomorrow more." Her body screamed at the thought of another day like this, but her heart didn't let her back down. She wanted to learn. She wanted to stay. She wanted to prove that she was more than a desperate girl begging outside a door. As she curled up in the corner that night, using her apron as a blanket, she replayed every mistake in her mind. Each broken dish, each crooked cut, each angry whisper from the humans. But over all those memories was one stronger image. The chef standing by her side, steady and unshaken, telling her to keep going. For the first time, she dared to imagine that maybe this place could become something more than just a shelter. Maybe it could be the beginning of a life she had never thought she could have. The days passed, and the girl kept working in the restaurant. She still made mistakes, but she was learning. She cleaned tables more carefully, cut vegetables with less trembling in her hands, and even managed to carry dishes without dropping them. Each small success gave her a tiny spark of pride, but that spark never lasted long. The stares of the customers, the whispers at the tables, reminded her every day that she was still different. The city outside was changing too. Word spread quickly that a human chef had taken in an alien girl and given her work. Some people laughed about it, calling the chef soft-hearted and foolish. Others were angry. "He's feeding one of them while humans are starving," they muttered. The more the story spread, the more tension grew. People who had never even entered the restaurant began to talk about it with disgust. One evening, after the last customer left, the girl overheard two men outside the window. Their voices were low, but her alien ears caught every word. "He's ruining his name. Letting an alien serve food to humans, it's shameful." Another man spat on the ground. "If he keeps her there, someone will deal with him. Mark my words." The girl froze where she stood, her hands tightening on the cloth she was using to wipe a table. Fear crept into her heart like ice. These men were not just whispering, they were threatening. They wanted to hurt the chef, and it was because of her. That night, she lay awake in her corner of the kitchen, her eyes wide in the dark. She thought about the chef's tired but steady face, about how he had defended her when others shouted. He had given her food, work, and a place to stay. And now she was putting him in danger. The thought burned in her chest. She could not let him pay the price for her life. The next morning, before the sun rose, she tried to leave. She quietly folded the apron he had given her and placed it on the counter. Her hands shook as she did it. Every part of her body screamed with hunger and exhaustion, but her fear was stronger. She told herself it was better to be cold and starving again than to see him get hurt because of her. She had just reached the door when a voice spoke behind her. "Where are you going?" She froze. Slowly she turned, and there he was, the chef, standing with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She clutched the strap of her torn bag tightly, her glowing eyes wide. He stepped closer, his voice calm but heavy. "You think I didn't notice? You're leaving because of what people are saying, aren't you?" Her silence was answer enough. She lowered her head, shame filling her chest. Finally, she whispered, "Danger, for you, because of me." The chef's expression hardened, but not in anger. He took a long breath, then shook his head. "Listen, you didn't force me to do this. I chose it. I gave you food, I gave you work, and I don't regret it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. She could not understand. Why would he risk everything for her? Humans had always looked at her with hate, but this one spoke as if her life mattered. He walked past her and pushed the apron back into her hands. "This is your fight too now. If you run, they'll win. They'll say they were right, that you don't belong anywhere. But if you stay, you can prove them wrong." Her hands trembled as she held the apron. His words burned inside her. Could she really prove them wrong? Could she stay and fight? She was weak, clumsy, and afraid. She had no strength to stand against angry crowds. But when she looked at him, she saw no fear. He was only one man, yet he stood as if nothing could shake him. That evening, the restaurant grew busy again. The girl worked with her head down, moving quickly between the tables. Every mistake she made felt heavier than before, because now she knew the danger was real. She could feel the glares of some customers, could hear the sharp words whispered too loudly. "Disgusting. She's touching the plates. I don't want to eat here anymore." He's lost his mind, letting her near food. Her throat tightened. She wanted to drop the tray and run, but then she remembered the chef's voice. "If you run, they'll win." Her grip on the tray tightened. She forced herself to keep moving, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Later that night, as they closed the restaurant, she sat in silence while the chef cleaned the counter. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but steady. "I stay." The chef looked at her, his tired eyes softening just a little. He gave a single nod. Good. The decision was simple, but it carried weight heavier than anything she had ever carried before. Staying meant facing the hatred, the threats, and the danger. But it also meant she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who believed in her, even when she could not believe in herself. As she curled up to sleep, clutching the apron tightly, she knew the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in her life, she had made a choice not out of fear, but out of hope. And that choice gave her a strength she had never known before. The night was busy, and the restaurant was full. Tables were covered with plates, steam rose from bowls, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. The alien girl moved quickly, carrying trays with shaking hands, her apron already stained from the day's work. She tried her best to ignore the whispers and stares, but tonight the tension felt sharper, heavier. The chef watched her closely as he cooked behind the counter, and his eyes scanning the room as if he knew something was coming. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. A group of rough-looking men stormed inside. Their faces were hard, their voices loud. The room fell silent at once, and every eye turned toward them. The girl froze where she stood, the tray in her hands rattling as her arms trembled. She recognized the anger in their eyes. They were here for her. One of the men pointed directly at her. "There she is," he growled. "Waste slut, the alien. We told you before, chef, this is human ground. Get her out now." Her heart hammered in her chest. She stepped back, nearly dropping the tray, her breath coming fast. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like stone. The whispers in the restaurant grew into murmurs, customers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked away, unwilling to be part of it, while others nodded in agreement with the men. The chef set down his ladle slowly and walked out from behind the counter. His footsteps were steady, each one echoing in the heavy silence. He placed himself between the girl and the men, his body like a shield. His voice was calm, but it carried power. "She works here. She belongs here. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The girl's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken for her like that before. She stared at the back of the chef, unable to believe what she was hearing. He was standing against a group of men much bigger and stronger than him, and he had nothing but his apron and the smell of food clinging to him. The men laughed cruelly. "You? A cook? You think you can stop us?" One of them stepped forward, his fists clenched. The chef didn't flinch. He grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a heavy iron frying pan, and held it in his hand like a weapon. The customers gasped, the sound of chairs scraping as some prepared to run if a fight broke out. "She's my worker," the chef said, his voice sharp as steel. "Touch her, and you'll deal with me." The girl pressed her hands over her mouth, her whole body trembling. She couldn't understand it. Why risk himself? Why fight for her when she was nothing but trouble? She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The men hesitated for a moment. They hadn't expected resistance. The leader sneered, stepping closer. "This is your last chance. Hand her over, or your little restaurant won't see another day." The chef's grip on the pan tightened. He didn't step back, his eyes locked with the man's, steady and unshaken. "Then you'll have to destroy it with me still standing here." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The girl could barely breathe. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, to hide, to disappear. But her eyes never left the chef. She realized, for the first time, that someone was ready to fight for her life. Not because of what she could give, not because of who she was, but simply because he had chosen to protect her. One of the men growled and made a move forward, but before he could take another step, a voice rose from one of the tables. "Enough!" Everyone turned. It was an older customer, a man who had eaten at the restaurant many times before. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I come here for food, not fights. The girl brings no harm. Let her work." Another voice joined him, a woman clutching her child close. "She's only trying to live. Leave her be." The murmurs spread quickly. More customers stood, glaring at the intruders. The men looked around, their confidence faltering, as they realized the crowd was not with them. They spat curses under their breath, but finally, with angry steps, they turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The room was still for a moment. Then the noise slowly returned, softer this time, cautious. The girl lowered her hands from her mouth, her eyes wide, her heart still racing. She stared at the chef, who lowered the frying pan and set it on the counter again. His shoulders were tense, but his face stayed calm. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she felt tears well in her eyes, hot and heavy. She quickly turned away, hiding her face. She didn't want anyone to see her cry, but inside, something had broken and something new had formed. Later that night, when the customers were gone and the chairs were stacked, the girl sat in silence by the counter. The chef washed the last dish, the sound of water filling the quiet room. She finally whispered, her voice raw. "Why? Why do you fight for me?" He looked at her, drying his hands with a towel. "Because no one else would, and because it's right." Her lips trembled, and she lowered her head, unable to hold his gaze. She had lived her whole life believing no human would ever see her as anything but a burden. But this man, this simple chef, had stood against a mob for her. The weight of that truth filled her chest, heavier than anything she had ever carried. As she curled up in her corner that night, her eyes still wet with tears, she knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a starving alien girl, hiding in shadows. She was someone worth fighting for, and that thought alone gave her more strength than she had ever felt before. The days after the fight were tense. The girl noticed how people looked at her whenever she carried food to the tables. Some eyes were filled with suspicion, others with open dislike. Yet there were also new faces, curious faces, customers who had heard about the strange alien girl working at a human restaurant. Some came only to stare, but others came to taste the food, to see if the stories were true. The restaurant was no longer just a place for meals. It had become a place of whispers, of change, of quiet defiance against the hatred outside. The girl worked harder than ever. Every morning she tied her apron with shaking hands, determined to prove she belonged. She cleaned until her fingers were raw, chopped vegetables until her arms ached, and balanced trays with careful steps. Each small victory made her heart swell, though the fear never fully left. At night, she lay awake replaying the chef's words in her mind. "This is your fight, too." One evening, the restaurant was more crowded than usual. The smell of food drifted through the air, mixing with the buzz of conversation. The girl carried bowls of steaming soup to a family at the far table. The little boy stared at her glowing eyes with wide curiosity. Instead of fear, there was wonder. He whispered to his mother, "She's pretty." The girl froze for a moment, her chest tightening, then placed the bowls down carefully. For the first time, a child's voice had not cut her with hate. It had warmed her. But not everyone was pleased. At a corner table, a group of men glared at her with dark expressions. She knew their type. They were waiting for her to fail, waiting for an excuse to stir trouble again. Her hands shook as she placed dishes in front of them. One of them sneered, whispering loudly enough for her to hear, "Should have been left to starve." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. She turned away quickly and returned to the counter, her heart pounding. The chef noticed her pale face, but before he could speak, a customer at another table raised his glass and said loudly, "The food is good. She's learning fast." The words spread through the room like a ripple. Some nodded, others muttered, but the air shifted. The men at the corner grumbled, but stayed silent, not daring to cause another scene after what had happened days before. As the night went on, the tension slowly melted into something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect. The girl moved from table to table, and though whispers followed her, they no longer all carried hate. Some were softer, filled with surprise. She could feel the difference. For the first time, the room did not feel like an enemy. When the last dish was cleared, the chef gathered the staff, which now included her, at the counter. He handed out food for them to eat together. The girl hesitated, looking at the plate in her hands. The meal was not charity. It was hers, earned, shared, equal. She took a bite slowly, savoring the warmth. Around her, laughter rose from the other workers. For a moment, she almost smiled. Later, when the restaurant was closed and the lights dimmed, she stood by the window. The streets outside were cold and dark, just as they had been the night she collapsed at the door. But now she was inside, standing in the glow of warmth. She looked down at her hands, still rough from work but steadier than before. The chef approached quietly and stood beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then he said in a low voice, "You did well tonight." Her glowing eyes lifted to him, full of questions she still didn't know how to ask. Why did he keep protecting her? Why did he keep giving her chances? Why her, of all people? But no words came. Instead, she whispered only two. "Thank you." He gave a small nod. "Keep working hard. That's thanks enough." Her chest ached at the simplicity of his answer. Humans she had met before had always demanded something in return, always turned kindness into cruelty. But this man's strength came from something else, something she could not yet name. As the night grew deeper, she curled up in her usual corner to rest. But her thoughts were different now. She no longer saw herself as a starving creature waiting for death. She saw herself in the kitchen, learning, cutting, cooking, serving. She saw herself standing behind the counter with the chef, facing customers not as a beggar, but as part of the place. In her heart, she whispered words she could not say aloud. "This is home." The next morning, when the restaurant opened again, the girl tied her apron without trembling. She stood straighter, her eyes brighter. The road ahead was still full of danger, but now she was not walking it alone. She had someone who believed in her, and slowly, she was beginning to believe in herself too. Her fate, once sealed by hunger and despair, had changed forever the moment a human chef offered her food and then a job. What began as a single act of kindness had grown into something stronger: hope, dignity, and a bond that neither fear nor hatred could easily break. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she was ready to face it, step by step, with her apron tied around her waist and courage quietly burning in her chest.